So it's a beautiful winter day in January. It's about -10 and a bit overcast. A perfect day to start a new project in the workshop. Jonathan called the other day and asked if I would make them a cutting board. Never made one of them things before, so I said of course. So I happen to have a large piece of live vid walnut left over from a little project from a few years back. This seemed to be a good project to use it on. So I quartered it up on my track saw as it was too big to put on the miter saw. And since I was going to be an end grain board, I needed to cut enough strips to make a board about 15 inches by 22 inches wide. And I think about 2 1/4 inches thick would probably be just about right. And I'm thinking that while I'm at it, I'll cut all of them up and select the best pieces for the final product. Here I'm just making sure they're all the same thickness and all the same width. I'll likely have enough pieces left over for a second board if this one actually turns out. Now with all the pieces cut, I need to select which pieces work best together. The most dramatic color changes are right beneath the live edge, just beneath the bark, where the light sap wood meets the bark. Unfortunately, that'll be mostly cut off once I trim it to size. I'm thinking it would take things up a notch if I actually added a border to it as well, using a lighter contrasting wood. So I found this really cool looking piece of zebra wood. Don't worry, no zebras were harmed in the production of this board. So I cut them up and arranged them in the proper contrasting order, so the grains always line up in opposing directions. And then I glued them all up. It appears to be a bit of a goofy shape because I needed 2 long pieces and 2 short pieces for the opposing sides. But I glued them all up in one piece and then cut them up accordingly. Once I put these things together, they tend to slip around a lot. As you put pressure on them, they seem to slip. Apparently, if you sprinkle a little bit of salt in there on top of the glue and then put them together, it'll stop it from sliding around, but I didn't try that. I just did it the old-fashioned way and worked a little extra hard to get them to stay aligned. Lining them all up before I put any pressure on them. I put the cauls on top and bottom so that they stay as flat as possible. And get out my fine adjustment tool and force them into submission, and then I let it dry. And here I am back to cutting the final pieces to size. I'm just doing some preliminary orientation of the boards and what I think may be the final design. I have no idea what I'm doing there, other than just admiring the pretty blocks. I gotta number them so I don't lose the order that I've settled on. This is the final design. Ah, this just in. Somebody just texted me they're having a dress-up day. Isn't she a cutie? Okay. Now it's time for another glue up. Here all the pieces are now glued up, including the borders to one side. You know, you just can't use too much glue on this stuff. Get every piece covered well. Put them together and add pressure. Lining them up is always a challenge because they tend to want to slip around when they're wet. Here I'm adding cauls again to keep everything as flat as possible. You know, you always need an extra pair of hands when you're doing this. And then let it dry overnight. That should do it. Next morning, pull it apart, scrape off the glue. Now it's time to trim up the edges and square up the sides. Get it ready for the two remaining borders on the long side. Back to the glue table to glue them up. Even pressure all around, not too much, just right so the glue squeezes out. There it goes. Nice. Oh, that was fast. That's dry. Give it another scrape. Back to the table saw to trim up the edges and square up the sides. Now it's time to flatten the top and the bottom. And since it's wider than my planer can only accommodate a 12-inch panel, I had to make this jig. And I found about 100,000 versions of it on YouTube and came up with my version based on the materials that I had in the shop. It's a pretty simple thing. Attached it to my table saw, which is the flattest surface I have, and then referenced everything off of that and flattened it with a flattening router bit, specially designed to do exactly this. It leaves some minor lines, but there's a lot of chip out on the zebra wood. It's such a hard wood that edges tend to splinter. So that's I had to do quite a bit of sanding just to get that all cleaned up. Fill some of the cracks with CA glue. CA glue is just awesome stuff. You can get it in black. Didn't really need to use black here. It was actually not a good decision because I had to do a lot more sanding. Could have used just a clear one that would have worked just as well, but fills up any of those chip outs and voids any imperfections in the wood. It keeps everything uniform. And now it's ready for the next step. I want to put in a juice groove, and so I got a little router bit that's going to cut a little 1/4-inch groove around the perimeter, and I built a little cleat system or a fence that I can accurately run my palm router around. And I just took 1/8 of an inch off at a time, went around it numerous times, because if I mess this up, it's back to square one. It's a real nerve-wracking part of this whole project, was cutting into the top. Yeah, pop all that apart. And then I used a 1/4-inch round over bit just to take the edges off of the corners, make it easy to touch. I had to adjust the speed a number of times. You can see the edges just burnt because I was running at a little bit too high speed. I had to slow it down. And again, you can sand off those burn marks if they get too bad. Going around it multiple times. And now I need some handles, so I made a little template that I could run the router through, and I can consistently get the handle made without doing any damage. Again, there's significant splintering on this zebra wood because it's so hard, but after multiple shallow passes I got it fairly clean. This took a while to get right. By the time I had this one done, doing it to the second side went a lot quicker. I used a sacrificial piece there just so that I could reduce the chip out. And back to sanding. And more sanding. And more sanding. And a little more. Ooh, did you see what happened there? A goober came out of my face mask. When you wear those things long enough, there's so much condensation builds up in the rubber mask that every now and then some water comes out of the mask. But that can be sanded out too. So I go through all the grits, start with 80, sand to 120, then 180, and then 220, and lastly 300. And this is one of the funnest, most enjoyable parts, is wetting it down with water and watching that grain pop for the first time. You can really see what the final product's gonna look like. And I do this to raise the grain. I let this dry for 24 hours, or 12 hours is pretty much enough. And then I would hit it with some 220 sandpaper one last time before I oil it. At this point I realized I need to provide a nice cutting board conditioner, and I just so happen to have a few pails full of beeswax cappings saved from the last 2 seasons of raising my bees, which is exactly what I need to finish this project. I hired a beautiful young lady to assist me, and she helped me render down all that beeswax. Wow, that's nice. Honey, you want to help me with this wax?
Well, I'll just play with the Barbie for a little.
Okay, you play with your Barbies.
Isn't that cool?
Here, come here. I'll lift you up. See it? Stick your finger in it, see? Good. Yeah. Okay, let me go play.
Okay.
Once the wax cools, it separates and rises to the top. And then the dirt and the debris is beneath it and falls to the bottom. All I do then is heat it up again and strain it. And then you'll have pure beeswax to use for all kinds of things. And here it's melting down and separating again. And I strain it through one of Karen's pantyhose. She'll probably not use them again. Picked up some of these silicone trays that hold 20 ml tiny cups, and I figured this is a convenient size to store the inventory in so I can use it for various products. And while that cools, I'm back in a workshop and I'm adding the first dressing of oil. I'll do this 3 or 4 times, liberally pouring the mineral oil all over the board, letting it soak in. Because it's end grain, it just soaks up the oil very quickly. And you can already see it's flashing at the top. Top and bottom, the entire board. That grain is just beautiful. Zebra woods really shows up nicely. Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, step 3 in our board conditioning starts. I measure 4 parts of mineral oil and 1 part of beeswax, and I throw in a few drops of lemon oil, and I crank it up to high on the old crock pot and watch it meld together. A little more lemon oil because I don't seem to be smelling much of it. Seems to burn off. Haven't figured out the right consistency of that yet. So I fill up these tins with the board conditioner. And since it was hot, I figured, hey, I can put that right on the wood. It'll soak in faster. Yeah, as you can see, it's kind of messy. I probably wouldn't do that again. Hey, ever watch beeswax cool? What's not cool? I put caps on and put them away. One last item missing for the board was something to stand it on. It comes in around 12.5 pounds, so a standing device of some kind might be a useful addition. I had a small piece of black walnut that just might do the trick. Just needed to flatten one side old school before putting it through the planer. Now just come up with a simple design and cut it out on the bandsaw. And please know that working with a bandsaw is very safe as long as you operate it slowly. And these film segments, I've sped up the video 20 times faster than normal. So I'm moving along quite safely. It just looks fast. And then I machine sand it to get the blade marks off and to fine tune the final shape. And then I also hand sand it with 220 before finally treating it with mineral oil. And we're on the home stretch. There you go. It's done. Oops, not done yet. Forgot the rubber feet. Need little rubber feet on the bottom so it doesn't move around the counter while you're using it. Now it's done. I hope you enjoyed watching this as much as I did building it, and maybe it will inspire you not to be afraid to learn something old. Take care.